They say evil has many faces. But what happens when the face of evil wears a smile and offers a helping hand? When the person you trust most, the caregiver, the nurse, the midwife, the one you invite into your home, turns out to be the monster you never saw coming. Today, we're diving deep into the darkest corners of true crime, revealing the most evil female serial killers you've never heard of. These women didn't just take lives. They shattered every notion of safety, love, and care we believe in. And trust me, their stories will leave you questioning everything. In this second installment of our chilling series, we move beyond the infamous names you might know and venture into the terrifying unknown. Women whose murders were so cold, so methodical, and so carefully disguised that many of them got away with their crimes for years, even decades. From midwives who turned childbirth into a death sentence to women who used arsenic as casually as sugar in their tea, these killers perfected the art of invisible murder. Their motives? Money, jealousy, power, and sometimes something far more sinister. A warped sense of control over life and death itself. Let's begin with a name that chilled Russia to its core. Irina Gaidamichuk. Known by the macabre title, Satan in a Skirt, Irina blended in perfectly with the everyday fabric of society. To her neighbors, she was an ordinary woman, but from 2002 to 2010, she stalked the most vulnerable, the elderly women of her community. Her strategy was as simple as it was deadly. Posing as a social worker, Irina knocked on doors with a friendly smile and an air of authority. Once inside, her kindness evaporated. In her hands, hammers and axes became tools of death. At least 17 women were beaten to death in their own homes, some of them after having tea with the killer who came to check on them. To erase evidence and buy herself time, Irina often set fires after the murders, turning homes into tombs of ash. And the motive? Not some grand ideology or bloodlust, but something shockingly mundane: money for alcohol. For 8 years, she played this deadly game until a survivor managed to escape and point the finger at her. The trial exposed a pattern of brutality hidden behind her calm demeanor. The sentence? A mere 20 years. 17 lives gone. And she'll walk free before most of us hit retirement. Now, if you thought Irina's crimes were terrifying, let's step back in time to meet a woman whose name sounds cheerful, but whose deeds were drenched in darkness. Jane Toppan. They called her Jolly Jane, a nurse in the United States during the late 1800s and early 1900s. But behind that nickname was a confession so disturbing it still shocks criminologists today. Jane admitted to killing at least 31 people, though experts believe the true number is much higher. Her weapon of choice wasn't a gun or a blade. It was the silent, untraceable touch of morphine and atropine injections. She didn't just kill for convenience or greed. No, Jane's motive was pure sadism. She wanted to watch life slip away from her victims while she lingered over their final breaths. She once told investigators that her ambition was to kill more people than anyone else in history. In the end, her own mind became her prison. Declared insane, she was locked in an asylum, where she lived until her death in 1938. Imagine that, the woman who played God for decades, living out her final years in the quiet halls of a psychiatric hospital, her secrets echoing like whispers down its sterile corridors. But Jane wasn't alone in cloaking murder in the guise of care. Across the Atlantic in early 19th century Germany lived a woman whose story reads like a gothic horror novel, Jesch Gottfried. Between 1813 and 1827, Jesch poisoned 15 people, weaving death into the fabric of her family and friends. Her parents, her children, her husbands, all consumed by the arsenic she slipped into their food and drink. Yet, in a performance worthy of an actress, Jesch played the grieving widow and heartbroken mother, gaining sympathy from her community as her loved ones died one by one. The truth unraveled slowly, and when it did, the spectacle was enormous. In 1831, Jesch was executed by beheading before a crowd of 35,000 people. A grim carnival of justice for the woman who hid her crimes behind tears and mourning clothes. Still, nothing compares to the industrial scale of killing carried out by Amelia Dyer, the so-called ogress of reading. Imagine Victorian England, a time of rigid morality and desperate poverty. In that world, unmarried mothers were easy prey for women like Amelia. She promised care and shelter for unwanted infants, charging a fee for her services. But instead of giving these babies a chance at life, she ended their tiny existences, often within days of arrival. The exact number of her victims remains unknown, but estimates range from 200 to as many as 400 babies. Her method was cruel simplicity: strangulation, sometimes with a piece of tape wound tightly around the neck. Bodies wrapped in parcels were tossed into rivers like forgotten dolls. For years, she operated unchecked until a suspicious package surfaced in the Thames, revealing the horror. Her trial captured the attention of the entire nation, and in 1896, she was hanged for her crimes. But even in death, the full measure of her evil remains impossible to comprehend. And then there's Hilda Nilsson, a name less known but equally chilling. In early 20th century Sweden, Hilda turned desperation into death. She offered hope to unmarried mothers, promising to care for their babies for a small fee. But behind closed doors, that hope turned into horror. Hilda drowned or suffocated the infants entrusted to her, disposing of their bodies with mechanical efficiency. At least 8 babies died at her hands, perhaps as many as 17. When her crimes came to light in 1917, the world recoiled, branding her the angel maker. Faced with a death sentence, Hilda chose her own execution, ending her life in prison before the state could claim it. From Russia to America, Germany to England, these women rewrote the rules of murder, not through brute force but through betrayal. They weaponized trust, turning love and care into instruments of death. And the worst part? This is just the beginning. If you're still here, don't forget to hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because in the next part, we'll expose killers whose methods are so shocking, they make these crimes look almost ordinary. As we move deeper into this dark gallery of forgotten killers, the question lingers. What makes someone turn care into cruelty, trust into a trap, and life into a ledger of death? The next case takes us to the United States, where a woman named Amy Archer Gilligan turned her home into something far worse than any haunted house. On the outside, her nursing home in Connecticut seemed like a safe haven for the elderly. Families placed their loved ones in her care, trusting Amy with their most fragile relatives. But for Amy, each new resident wasn't just a guest. They were a paycheck, and death was the quickest way to collect. Between 1908 and 1916, mysterious deaths began stacking up inside her home. Old age, people assumed. But when investigators finally peeled back the genteel wallpaper of Amy's world, they uncovered a chilling truth. Arsenic slipped silently into meals and medicine. Amy forged wills, altered documents, and walked away with the fortunes of the dead. Officially, 5 murders were proven. Unofficially, more than 60 may have perished under her care. Her trial gripped the nation. Sentenced to life, she died decades later in a psychiatric hospital. Proof that sometimes evil doesn't wear horns, but a neatly pressed apron and a reassuring smile. But if Amy was cold and calculating, the next woman was something else entirely. A killer who believed she was doing society a favor. Her name was Miyuki Ishikawa, known in Japan as the Demon Midwife. In the chaotic years of the 1940s, as war shattered families and poverty consumed entire cities, Miyuki carved out her own twisted solution to human suffering. She targeted the most helpless victims of all, newborn babies. Working as a respected midwife, she convinced struggling parents that death was better than life for their unwanted infants. Then, with chilling efficiency, she let those tiny lives slip away through neglect, starvation, and cold indifference. Her justification? Mercy. Her motive? Convenience. Estimates suggest she was responsible for over 100 infant deaths. And here's the most shocking part. When the law finally caught up with her, the sentence wasn't death, or even life behind bars. Just 4 years. 4 years for more than 100 lives. If that doesn't make your skin crawl, nothing will. From Japan, we move to Taiwan, where Lin Yuju's story unfolds like a grim drama of greed and betrayal. Lin wasn't a killer for pleasure, nor for ideology. Her motive was simple: money, to fuel her gambling addiction. But her methods were chilling in their intimacy. Cyanide, slipped into tea or soup, given to people she loved or claimed to love. Her mother, her mother-in-law, her ex-husband. No one was safe if they stood between her and the cash she craved. Insurance policies became death warrants. Every signature a countdown to murder. When authorities finally pieced it together, Lynn faced life in prison, a fate far kinder than the one she gave her victims. But in Vietnam, Le Tan Van showed that when greed and ruthlessness intertwine, the results can be catastrophic. Throughout the 1990s, Le Tan Van poisoned at least 12 people, including her own husbands and neighbors. Her weapon was trust. She lured victims with invitations and gifts, turning hospitality into homicide. The payoff? Jewelry, cash, and the thrill of wealth. But her ambition was her undoing. A string of suspicious deaths and lavish spending drew the law straight to her door. Her trial was sensational, her execution inevitable. And yet, for years, she moved freely among friends and family, laughing, eating, plotting, while her victims unknowingly sipped death from her hand. Still, some killers prefer a partner in crime, and our next story proves that sisterhood isn't always about love and loyalty. Catherine Flanagan and Margaret Higgins, remembered as the Black Widows of Liverpool, were two Irish sisters whose lives in 1880s England seemed ordinary, until bodies began piling up. Their scheme was as clever as it was cruel. They joined burial societies, clubs that paid money upon a member's death, and then started creating deaths of their own. Arsenic became their silent accomplice, slipped into food and drink until sickness claimed another victim and profit rolled in. For deaths were confirmed, but whispers suggest more. Their downfall came when greed turned sloppy, and suspicion brought Scotland Yard to their doorstep. In 1884, the sisters swung from the gallows, their black silhouettes etched against the gray English sky. As you listen to these stories, a pattern emerges, a horrifying echo across time and continents. Most of these women didn't kill in the heat of passion or rage. They killed slowly, methodically, behind masks of kindness and care. Nurses, midwives, landladies, sisters. Roles that society trusts the most. And perhaps that's why their crimes went undetected for so long. Because who questions the woman feeding your baby? Who doubts the caregiver holding your mother's hand? Who suspects the midwife promising a better life? But the most chilling truth? These stories are not relics of the past. Even now, cases surface. Nurses under investigation, caregivers exposed, killers hiding behind warm smiles and gentle words. History keeps whispering. But are we listening? If this has left you uneasy, good. It should. Because in the final part of this series, we'll uncover cases so shocking, so grotesque, they redefine what evil looks like. You think you've heard the worst? Not even close. Stay tuned. And before you go, make sure to hit like, share this with someone who loves true crime, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Evil isn't loud. It doesn't always roar with chaos or bloodshed in the open. Sometimes it's a whisper in a nursery, a smile over a teacup, or the comforting hand of a nurse tucking someone into bed for the last time. And nowhere is that truth more disturbing than in the stories of women who killed. Not in fits of rage, but with the calm precision of someone pouring tea. As we close this chapter of the series, let's pull back and see the full picture. Across decades and continents, these women shared something chilling beyond their methods. Pattern, a philosophy even. Poison was the favored weapon, not just for its silence, but for the control it gave them. Arsenic, cyanide, morphine, chemicals that don't scream, don't stain floors, don't alert neighbors. Death delivered without a struggle, while the killer remained the grieving friend, the devoted nurse, the loving mother. Consider Jane Toppin, Jolly Jane, a nurse sworn to heal, who confessed to ending 31 lives. But her motive wasn't greed like Amy Archer Gilligan. It was pleasure. She admitted she loved the feeling of holding someone as they died, watching the light fade from their eyes. Imagine that. A caregiver, killing for intimacy, for the twisted thrill of control over life and death. And she wasn't an isolated case. Think about Jesh Gottfried, poisoning her own parents, her children, her lovers, 15 lives stolen over 14 years. In public, she mourned. She played the grieving daughter, the devastated mother. Crowds pitied her. People trusted her more. And all the while, she stirred arsenic into meals, smiling as death spread quietly from her table. When the truth came out, the shock was so profound that 35,000 people gathered to watch her execution. Evil wrapped in a woman's face was a spectacle they couldn't believe, even when they saw it. But perhaps the most haunting example of all comes from Amelia Dyer, the so-called ogress of reading, a woman who turned motherhood into a marketplace of death. For decades in Victorian England, when poverty forced desperate mothers to give up their babies, Amelia stepped in as the kindly caretaker. She promised love, safety, a good home. What she delivered was a river full of tiny corpses, babies strangled with tape, dumped in parcels, floating through the murky Thames. Authorities believe she may have killed up to 400 infants, making her one of the most prolific serial killers in history. And yet, for years, no one suspected a thing. Why? Because who would question a woman whose arms were full of babies? Who would imagine a mother selling death to the highest bidder? It's easy to think these are just stories from a darker past. But history doesn't vanish, it echoes. Every time society assumes women can't be monsters, killers like these thrive. Every time we look away because a woman wouldn't do that, another Jane, another Amelia, another Miyuki slips through the cracks. And the real danger? They're not driven by impulse. They're planners. They use patience as a weapon, kindness as camouflage, and your trust as the rope around your own neck. What drives them? For some, it's greed, a hunger for wealth, gambling debts to pay, insurance policies to cash. For others, it's power, the cold thrill of deciding who lives and who dies. And sometimes, it's something far more disturbing, a warped form of love, like Edmund Kemper with his spirit wives, or the nurses who killed babies because they thought parents didn't deserve them. These killers often believe they're justified. They see themselves as saviors, not murderers. And that might be the scariest part. Even after the trials end, after the hangings, the beheadings, the prison doors slam shut, one truth remains. Society never expects women to be predators. And they know it. They count on it. They weaponize it. Now ask yourself this: how many more stories like these are out there, hidden in hospital wards, nursing homes, foster systems, places where vulnerability meets trust? How many deaths marked as natural were actually planned? How many smiles hid arsenic behind the lips? We may never know, but history whispers a warning. The most terrifying monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they look like caregivers. Sometimes, they look like us. Before you leave, take a moment. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden side of true crime, hit that like button, share this video with someone who thinks they've seen it all, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the darkness no one talks about. Because what's coming next will shake everything you thought you knew about evil.